Hey guys, in this video we're talking about patch bays. So I'm going to go over the basics of a patch bay, but more importantly I'm going to go over some examples of how I use patch bays and how they inspire creativity and kind of experimentation. Alright, so if you're completely new to patch bays, effectively they're very simple devices. They're passive, so they don't take any power. All they have is a bunch of jacks in the front and a bunch of jacks in the back, and then inside the patch bay those jacks are just connected to each other. So you might be wondering what's the point of a patch bay, because it's a very simple device. So for me primarily it's just a way for me to be able to quickly patch different synths into different effects, and also guitars and basses and stuff like that. So if you think about it, a patch bay, you're basically connecting all your different inputs and outputs around your studio. So for example, the output of the MS-20 goes in the back of the patch bay, the output of the Poly 6 goes in the back, and then I have this Sherman filter bank here, which is a distortion unit, which has an input and an output. So again, I put the input and the output into the patch bay in the back. Same thing with these Mogerfogers. Each one of these, which are effectively just guitar pedals, each one of these has inputs and outputs, and each of those individually goes into the patch bay. So effectively all the hardware you see in my studio here, if it has inputs and outputs, they're connected into the patch bay in the back. So where the power shines is when you start to patch these things together via the front side of the patch bay. So for example, let's say I wanted to run the MS-20 through this Mogerfoger delay pedal. If I didn't have a patch bay, what I would have to do is physically take this cable here, drag it along, plug it into the back here, and then grab the output of that and then put that into my audio interface, for example. But then let's say I wanted to try, okay, what if I run this Poly 6 through the delay pedal instead of the MS-20? Without a patch bay, I'd have to go there, grab this cable, and then fiddle around in the back of the Poly 6, replace its cable, etc. You can see it quickly gets really tedious and it kind of impedes the creative process. And I think that's really where the core of the patch bay, where it really starts to shine, is that because it makes things really quick, it makes it much easier for you to experiment different sounds because it reduces the friction. The secondary benefit of patch bays for my particular case is that I have a 2-channel interface, and the patch bay allows me to easily pick what 2 things I want to route into those 2 channels. So for example, I can easily route the MS-20 and the Poly 6 into those 2 channels, or I can switch it to have one of my mics go in and the Poly 6, or I can have 2 mics, or I can plug in a guitar and a bass really quickly just by patching a simple little cable like this in the front. Okay, let's take a look at my rack here so I can show you in practice what this looks like. So at the top here, you can see an example of a 1/4" patch bay. This is the Samsung S Patch Plus. In the middle here, I have an Xlr Patch Bay by ART, so I'll go over that in a sec, and I'll put all the links to all this stuff in the description if you're curious. And then at the bottom here, I just have a line mixer, so I'm going to talk about the last 2 in a sec. Let's go over the patch bay here. So the way this works is that all the different gear in my studio that has outputs, so like synthesizers or guitar pedals, all the output jacks are routed into the top row here in the back of the unit. And then all the inputs, so the input to the guitar pedals or the input to the MS-20 signal processor, all those go in the back, including in the bottom, including the inputs of my audio interface. So all those cables are kind of tucked in the back here. That's why you don't see them here. So what you do in the front is you're literally just patching output to input, so going from top to bottom. And that's just a convention. You can obviously use it in a different way. So the simplest example I can show is, for example, the input to my left audio interface is this first bottom jack here, and the output of the MS-20 is up here. So if I just wanted to record the MS-20, all I do is I patch the MS-20 output into my channel 1 of my interface. And now if I just select channel 1 on my audio interface in Ableton Live, I can just play the MS-20. Alright, so let's say now I wanted to record the Poly 6 instead of the MS-20 and that channel 1 again. So without a patch bay, I would have to go in the back of my interface and kind of fiddle with cables, or I would have to grab this cable and then find a way to place it into the Poly 6. But instead, with a patch bay, all I have to do is switch this cable 1 spot over, which is where I have the Poly 6. And now instantly I can just play the Poly 6. And of course I can add some effects in Ableton here. Alright, so far we've just been experimenting with really simple patches by just running our synthesizer straight into the audio interface, which is cool. But really the power is when you start to patch different kinds of effects. So up here I have 4 different Mogerfogers, as you can see, and then I have the Sherman filter bank up here, which is kind of a distortion slash filter. So all of these are plugged in to the back here, so I can patch them in individually. So you might be wondering, how do you know where you plug things in? Because things can get really confusing. So some people write stuff directly on the patch bay, which is super handy. What I do is I just open a Google Doc and I have a spreadsheet with all the different stuff. So every time I plug something in the back, I just update the spreadsheet. And then I have that bookmarked. So every time I need to reference something, I just kind of open that up. Okay, so we have the dry poly 6 here. So now let's say I wanted to run the poly 6 through the Mographogue or the analog delay. So I have the analog delay going in channel 22 here. So again, I'm just going to grab the output of my MS-20, which is coming out of the top here. Again, it's always outputs at the top, inputs at the bottom. That's the best way to kind of stick with that convention. So again, I'm going out of my poly 6 channel 2 here, and then I'm going to go into the input of my analog delay, which happens to be at channel 22 here. And then you're just kind of creating a signal patch very simply. And I'll go to from the output of my analog delay into the channel 1 of my audio interface. So in this case, I'm using a convention where I put the input and the output of the same device right on top of each other, but you don't have to do that. I could have plugged the output of my analog delay here, for example. I just find it more convenient to kind of reference if I have a guitar pedal or something. I know that exactly its input and output are always going to be vertically aligned here. All right, so now I can just engage my delay here. So now if I play the poly 6, just like that. But then the cool thing is that you can just patch as many things as you want really simply. So for example, we can try, what if we go poly 6 into the analog delay and then into the ring modulator here. So again, you just have to follow the connection. So we go from the output of our poly 6 into the input of our analog delay. So I'm just going to plug the output. So I'm going to go from the analog delay into my ring mod, which happens to be at channel 21 here. And then finally from the ring mod, we're going to go into our interface. So now we're going to go delay and ring mod. So already we've got a really cool sound, and that would have taken a lot of fiddling to how to recreate that patch using the physical outputs of the devices. Instead, all I'm doing is tweaking these cables here. So it makes it really fun and quick to experiment with different sounds. And just as easily now I can use that same effects chain, but just swap out the synthesizer. So instead of the poly 6, I can plug in the MS-20 literally just by moving this cable over by one slot. And just like that, now we have the MS-20 going through the delay and the ring mod. So you can see how you can quickly go really crazy, and then you can switch the order of the devices, you can insert different pedals, you can add an effects bank, etc. And of course, you're not limited to just synthesizers. You can use any instrument that you can turn into a 1/4-inch signal. So in this case, I just have a free dangling cable under my desk, which is plugged into the back of the patch bay as well. And what I use this for, this is kind of my guitar/bass cable. So every time I want to record a guitar or bass, I just bring the instrument and plug this in. In fact, I'm going to do that just now. All right, so I have my P bass here, so I'm going to connect it to this cable here. And then if you look at my patch bay here, in slot number 3 is where I have this free cable assigned. So I can use the exact same effect setup, the analog delay into the ring mod, just as an example. And instead of going from the MS-20, I can plug that into my bass input here. So now my bass is going through the delay and the ring mod. And similarly, I have this little piezo microphone dangling at the bottom, which is just like a contact microphone. And again, it's just sitting at the bottom and plugged into the patch bay, kind of just sitting idly until I need it. So again, right now, let's say I wanted to run this Merlin through the analog delay and ring modulator. So again, without changing any of the other cables, all I have to do is pick the output that I want. In this case, it's the output of the contact mic. So now if I just stick this here, so let me increase the drive here. Or I can just tap this. Hello? Hello? What? And of course I can plug in a microphone into that same effect channel. So again, I'm gonna switch the output to use 18 here, which is why I have the mic. Hello.
Reduce the output again. So now you can see that this microphone is now going to this effects chain. And we can go crazy here with this crazy effect and route some different things.
And just as simply, you can swap things out. So for example, if we wanted to run the MS-20 through the Sherman filter bank, I just look up my reference and I can see the Sherman filter bank is on channel 17. So let me patch this stuff out. So again, I go MS-20 into my 17 input at the bottom here, and then from the output of the Sherman into my interface channel 1. And now we have the MS-20 going through the Sherman. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So anytime I bring in another pedal or some other effects unit, all I have to do is plug it into the back of the patch bay, and then it's available for the whole studio to use. So I can use my vocals through it. I can easily run guitars, basses, synths, whatever, in different configurations. So yeah, it's a super inspiring tool. I've gone without a patch bay for the longest time because I never really understood its use. I thought it was only for kind of big studios, and I never really appreciated how you could use it. But once it kind of clicked for me that all it is just an extension of all the inputs and outputs you have throughout your studio, and it kind of just brings everything into the front so you can easily just patch quickly through things. And then once I realized the potential of just quickly swapping out effects of, oh, what if I run my guitar through, I don't know, this spring reverb, or maybe I can run my guitar through this synthesizer, or I can run this synth through these two pedals and then through this. Basically, you can just really experiment really quickly by trying different things and seeing if something sparks some creative ideas. All right, so let me talk about this Xlr Patch Bay and this line mixer I have. So this is kind of to solve a specific problem. So I needed to find a way that I could feed two Xlr cables in the back of my interface and optionally have phantom power in either one of those. This way I can quickly say, okay, if I need this microphone here, I can quickly switch this on and turn on phantom power and it'll work fine. Or I can swap that same input of my interface to use a synthesizer without having to go in the back of the interface. So the main challenge there was that a standard 1/4 inch patch bay like this doesn't support running phantom power through it. It's not going to transport phantom power through an Xlr connection. So the way I came around this is that I'm effectively using this Xlr Patch Bay here as kind of my main bus to buffer both the 1/4 inch stuff coming from the 1/4 inch patch bay and my Xlr phantom power mics, and kind of group those together. This Xlr patch bay is not a patch bay similar to this. It doesn't have like an input to output jack like this. All it's doing is it's routing the Xlr connection in the back to the front. So it's almost like having a bunch of small Xlr cables inside this device. So what I do is I plug in my phantom power mics in the back of this, and those are available in specific slots here. And then the other thing I do to kind of merge this patch bay with this one is that the output of this patch bay, these first two connections at the bottom, actually go through a radial JDI D2, I believe. It's a device which takes two 1/4 inch inputs and outputs two Xlr outputs, and it also has a ground lift feature. So if I have ground hum, that kind of eliminates it all. So basically this patch bay behaves like a normal patch bay. All my gear, synthesizers, and effects are routed in here, but these two outputs here are effectively mapped to these two Xlr jacks here. If I just patch something into the output 1 here, it just appears as an Xlr connection down here via that JDI converter. And then I have these two cables which are connected to the back of my interface. So channel 1 of my interface, channel 2 of my audio interface. So now with these two, I can just pick what I want to record. So for example, if I want channel 1 of my interface to record this channel here, which is mapped to this jack of the 1/4 inch patch bay, now we're going to get effectively this channel going through here, and then down here, and then here going to the interface. Same thing with the second jack. So this is what allows me to use a 2-channel interface, but have the ability to pick as many inputs as I want, except I can't record them at the same time, obviously, but I can just pick and choose between recordings. So I can record something with a mic, and then all I have to do is kind of swap this out and pick a different mic if I need to, or kind of bring it back here. And then finally, we have a line mixer here, which just has a bunch of different channels in the back. And then those get mixed together, obviously, here. And then the two outputs of this interface, I plugged into my 1/4" patch bay here. What this allows me to do is create kind of a secondary mix bus of random things I want to combine together and have those available in the patch bay here as if they were normal kind of instruments. The main thing I'm using this for right now is for this secondary mic here. So this mic I use as kind of my experimental mic that I run through effects. So this mic is going through this line mixer, which allows it to get phantom power as well, because I'm using a cloud lifter. That's in this mixer here. It can get available into the 1/4" patch bay as a standard input. So basically it allows me to turn this mic just like I would a synthesizer in here. And that's what allows me to run this through like an octa track if I want to sample some vocals, or I can run it through a bunch of effects if I want some kind of creative outlet. So it allows me to take this mic, run it through some crazy effects, and then finally I can run that output and record it in my interface if I want to. So I would definitely recommend, if your studio has a bunch of different hardware, especially lots of different effects, it seems like a no-brainer. They're relatively cheap. They're super lightweight and simple. They don't take any power. You can just put them anywhere. They're really tiny. When you pull it out, it's kind of like this deep almost only. It kind of cleans up your studio and it cleans up your workflow, because instead of having to like physically patch things around, which is what I used to do, you can just patch them really simply with these short cables and quickly create an experiment with different signal routings. All right, hopefully that sparked some interest in PatchBays if you haven't had one before. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next.